In the wild, where nature's power is unmatched, even the most seasoned adventurers can find themselves in peril. Imagine a camper in Siberia suddenly attacked by a grizzly bear, or a family's peaceful trip in the Great Smoky Mountains, interrupted by a black bear's aggression. Picture hunters in Montana being stalked by a relentless predator, or a traveler on an Arctic cruise facing a polar bear's unexpected charge. From Alaska's icy waters to Virginia's quiet trails, these 6 stories revealed the dangers hidden in the wilderness, where survival is uncertain and every moment counts. On June 25, 2024, Greg, a 354-pound outdoorsman, ventured deep into the remote Siberian wilderness of Russia for a solo camping trip. A seasoned hiker and camper, Greg had spent years exploring Russia's vast and untamed landscapes. His passion for the outdoors was a driving force in his life, providing him with peace and a thrilling connection to nature. Greg was well aware that the Siberian wilderness demanded caution and preparation, especially in bear country. Greg had always been fascinated by the rugged beauty of Siberia, with its dense forests, expansive rivers, and the sense of solitude that came with being far from civilization. This trip was one he had been planning for months, a chance to test his skills and immerse himself in the wild. After hours of hiking through thick woods and across rocky terrain, he found the perfect spot to set up camp near a secluded river. The location was ideal, quiet, remote, and surrounded by natural beauty. As Greg unpacked his gear and set up his tent, he felt a deep satisfaction in being so far from the noise and distractions of everyday life. The sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the gentle flow of the river created a soothing backdrop as he prepared for the evening. Confident in his abilities, Greg meticulously planned every detail of the trip, bringing along the necessary supplies and safety equipment, including bear spray, to ensure he was well prepared for any situation. By late afternoon, Greg had settled into his campsite, enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, he decided to prepare his evening meal. The smell of freshly caught fish sizzling over the campfire filled the air, adding to Greg's sense of contentment. Unbeknownst to him, however, the aroma of his meal had attracted the attention of a massive grizzly bear lurking nearby. The grizzly, driven by hunger, had been drawn to the area by the scent of the fish. Emerging from the dense forest, the bear's eyes locked onto Greg's campsite, its focus entirely on the source of the smell. The vast wilderness that had once seemed so serene now harbored a deadly threat that Greg could not have anticipated. As Greg prepared to sit down and enjoy his meal, he suddenly became aware of a presence behind him. He turned just in time to see the enormous grizzly bear charging at him with incredible speed. The bear's sheer size and power were overwhelming, and Greg barely had time to react before the animal was upon him. The grizzly knocked Greg to the ground with a force that left him stunned, its claws and teeth tearing into him as he struggled to defend himself. Greg's instinct was to reach for his bear spray, but the ferocity of the bear's attack left him with little chance to fend off the assault. Despite his size and strength, Greg was no match for the grizzly, which seemed intent on overpowering him completely. The situation grew increasingly dire as Greg's attempts to protect himself were met with the bear's relentless aggression. The wilderness, which had once been a place of solace and challenge, had now become a deadly arena where survival was uncertain. Greg's vision blurred as the grizzly bear continued its assault, each swipe of its massive paws inflicting deep, jagged wounds on his body. The pain was unbearable, and every breath he took seemed to ignite new waves of agony. Despite the overwhelming force of the bear, Greg's survival instincts kicked in, driving him to fight with whatever strength he had left. He tried to curl into a protective ball, shielding his vital organs, but the bear's powerful jaws clamped onto his shoulder, shaking him violently. The bear was relentless, its hunger and aggression turning the serene Siberian wilderness into a nightmare. Blood soaked the ground around Greg as he struggled to reach for his bear spray, knowing it was his only chance. But the grizzly's attack was too vicious, leaving him pinned and helpless. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, Greg heard distant shouts cutting through the chaos. A group of nearby hunters, drawn by Greg's desperate cries, raced toward the scene. They could see the massive bear, its fur matted with blood, as it continued to maul Greg. The hunters knew they had only moments to act. With rifles raised, they fired several shots into the air, hoping to scare the bear away. The noise startled the grizzly, causing it to pause and look up from its attack. The hunters fired again, this time closer, and the bear finally released its grip on Greg, retreating into the forest with a furious roar. The hunters rushed to Greg's side, their faces pale with shock at the sight of his injuries. Blood poured from multiple wounds, and Greg's breathing was shallow and labored. The severity of the attack was clear. He needed immediate medical attention. The hunters quickly fashioned a makeshift stretcher, lifting Greg with care as they began the arduous journey back to civilization. The rugged terrain that Greg had once navigated with ease now became a grueling obstacle as the hunters carried him, every bump and jolt sending fresh pain through his battered body. Hours later, they finally reached a location where they could call for help. A helicopter was dispatched to airlift Greg to the nearest hospital, where a team of doctors was already preparing for his arrival. As the helicopter soared over the vast Siberian wilderness, Greg's consciousness faded in and out, his mind struggling to process the horror of what had just happened. At the hospital, Greg was rushed into surgery. The doctors worked tirelessly to repair the extensive damage caused by the bear's claws and teeth. His shoulder and torso bore the worst of the injuries, with deep lacerations and fractures that required immediate attention. The surgical team knew that even with their best efforts, Greg's road to recovery would be long and arduous. In the days that followed, Greg remained in intensive care, his body fighting to heal from the traumatic injuries. The attack had left him physically shattered and emotionally scarred, with the memory of the bear's ferocity haunting his every waking moment. As the news of the attack spread, it served as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness, even for the most experienced outdoorsmen. The aftermath of the incident also sparked discussions about the growing risks of human-wildlife encounters in remote areas. Greg's story became a cautionary tale, highlighting the need for increased awareness and safety measures in regions known for their grizzly bear populations. On January 15, 2024, the Johnson family embarked on a weekend camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains. David, 42, his wife Sarah, 39, and their two children, 12-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Jake, were eager to escape their daily routine in Knoxville, Tennessee, and enjoy nature. The Great Smoky Mountains, with its misty peaks and dense forests, was a favorite spot for the Johnsons, who were well aware of the park's black bear population. David, an experienced outdoorsman, had taken all necessary precautions for the trip. He bought bear-proof containers, followed the park's safety guidelines, and brought bear spray. Sarah, a school teacher, had educated their children on respecting wildlife and staying calm during an encounter. Emily and Jake, though young, were familiar with camping and outdoor safety. The family arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon and set up their tent near a clear mountain stream. The air was crisp and cold as the sun set, casting long shadows through the trees. They gathered around the campfire, enjoying a meal of grilled chicken and vegetables, and ended the evening with roasted marshmallows, their laughter echoing through the forest. As night fell, the family retired to their tent, confident in the precautions they had taken. The food was stored in the bear-proof containers at a safe distance from the tent, and the fire was extinguished. The night was peaceful, with only the sounds of the forest in the background. However, the lingering scent of their dinner had attracted a large black bear. Driven by hunger, the bear followed the scent through the dark woods, eventually arriving at the Johnsons' campsite. Black bears are curious and opportunistic, and this one was no different. It approached the bear-proof containers and managed to pry one open with its powerful claws, finding remnants of the family's dinner inside. In the early morning hours, David was awakened by the sound of the bear rummaging through the container. Concerned, he decided to investigate. Unzipping the tent carefully, he stepped out into the cold morning air and spotted the large black bear near the opened container. The bear, startled by David's sudden appearance, shifted from curiosity to aggression. It charged at David, knocking him to the ground and clamping its jaws onto his leg. David felt searing pain as the bear's teeth sank into his flesh. He struggled to free himself, kicking and pushing with all his might. Inside the tent, Sarah was jolted awake by the commotion. Realizing something was wrong, she quickly unzipped the tent and urged the children to stay inside. When she saw the bear attacking David, panic gripped her, but she knew she had to act fast. She grabbed a metal pan and began banging it loudly, hoping to scare the bear away. The children, terrified, huddled together, listening to their father's cries. The noise from the pan startled the bear, causing it to momentarily release David. But the bear, now agitated, turned its attention towards Sarah. Desperate to protect her family, Sarah continued making noise, using anything she could find. The bear hesitated, torn between the smell of food and the sudden noise. Meanwhile, David crawled away from the bear, trying to distance himself from the predator. Frustrated by the noise and the lack of an easy meal, the bear eventually turned and retreated into the woods. Sarah rushed to David's side, finding him bleeding heavily from deep lacerations on his leg. She quickly wrapped his leg in a makeshift bandage and helped him back into the tent to keep him warm and calm the children. Realizing the severity of David's injuries, Sarah called 911. Park rangers and an ambulance arrived at the campsite shortly after. The rangers confirmed the bear had retreated into the forest, and paramedics carefully loaded David onto a stretcher, stabilizing his leg. The children watched in fear as their father was carried away, but Sarah stayed strong, comforting them with reassuring words. At the hospital, doctors quickly took David into surgery to repair the damage caused by the bear's bite. The deep wounds required multiple stitches, and there was concern about infection. Sarah and the children waited anxiously, replaying the terrifying events of the morning in their minds. After hours of surgery, the doctor informed Sarah that David was stable. The relief was overwhelming, and Sarah hugged her children tightly, grateful that David had survived. The doctors explained that David would need time to heal, both physically and emotionally, from the trauma. The incident at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park served as a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers in the wilderness. For the Johnson family, the experience left them with a newfound respect for nature and the importance of always being prepared, no matter how experienced or cautious they thought they were. David's recovery would take time, but the family was grateful to have come through the ordeal together, their bond stronger than ever. In January 2024, Jim and Mark, two seasoned hunters, ventured into Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness for an elk hunt. The wilderness, known for its rugged terrain, was familiar to both men, who shared a deep-rooted passion for hunting passed down through generations. Jim, 45, was a tall, sturdy man with years of hunting experience, while Mark, 40, was the planner of the duo, always ensuring they were prepared for anything. The hunt was one they had eagerly anticipated for months. The harsh winter conditions made the hunt challenging, but also meant fewer hunters in the area. The wilderness, with its dense forests and snow-covered peaks, was unforgiving, but that was part of the appeal. It was a place where they could disconnect from the world, relying only on their wits and each other. As they trekked through the snow-covered trails, they came across tracks in the snow. Jim crouched down to examine the prints, which were too large for an elk. He signaled to Mark, and they both realized these were the tracks of a grizzly bear, likely a male. Encountering a bear in the middle of winter was unusual, as most would be hibernating. However, this bear was on the move. The discovery heightened their senses, but they continued their hunt, not overly concerned. Both had encountered bears before and knew how to handle themselves. As the day progressed, they noticed more signs of the bear's presence: broken branches, disturbed snow, and claw marks on trees. It became clear that the bear was tracking them, following their scent through the dense woods. Feeling uneasy, Jim suggested they turn back towards their camp. Mark agreed, and they began the slow trek back, rifles ready. The snow fell heavier, the trees around them growing thicker, making it harder to see. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, making them increasingly anxious. As they reached a dense area of the forest, the bear suddenly charged from the underbrush, its massive form barreling towards them with terrifying speed. Jim barely had time to raise his rifle before the bear was upon him, slashing through the air with its powerful claws. Shots rang out, echoing through the forest, but the bear was relentless. It knocked Jim to the ground, tearing into him with a ferocity that left no room for escape. Mark, standing just a few feet away, fired at the bear in a desperate attempt to save his friend. The bear roared in pain but continued its attack on Jim, pinning him down and mauling him viciously. Mark fired again, and finally the bear collapsed, its massive body falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Mark rushed to Jim's side, his heart pounding. The snow around them was stained with blood, and Jim lay motionless beneath the bear's massive weight. Mark's hands trembled as he pulled Jim free, finding him severely injured with deep gashes across his chest and arms. Blood poured from the wounds, turning the snow beneath him a sickening red. Mark knew they had to move quickly. He tore off his jacket and pressed it against Jim's worst injuries, trying to stem the bleeding. The cold air stung his face as he worked, his breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. Jim moaned in pain, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before closing again. Mark called out to him, urging him to stay awake, but Jim's consciousness was slipping away. The forest around them was eerily silent, the only sound the distant wind and Mark's frantic movements. He had to get Jim to help, but they were miles from the nearest road, deep in the heart of the wilderness. Mark fumbled for his radio, hands numb from the cold and shock, and managed to send out a distress call. The seconds felt like hours as he waited for a response, every breath a reminder of the urgency of the situation. Finally, a park ranger's voice crackled through the radio, a lifeline in the freezing isolation. Mark relayed their location as best he could, describing the landscape and their proximity to the river they had been tracking. The ranger assured him that help was on the way, but Mark knew it would take time to reach such a remote area. Every minute was critical, and Jim's life hung in the balance. Mark looked down at his friend, who was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. The snow continued to fall around them, a stark contrast to the life-or-death struggle beneath the trees. Mark's thoughts raced as he tried to keep Jim warm and conscious, but the severity of the injuries was clear. The grizzly's attack had been brutal, and Jim's body was broken in ways that only emergency surgery could begin to repair. When the rescue team finally arrived, it felt like a small miracle. They worked quickly, stabilizing Jim before loading him onto a stretcher. The journey back to civilization was grueling, the snow and rough terrain making every step treacherous. Mark stayed by Jim's side, his heart heavy with fear and guilt. They had been so confident in their abilities, so sure they could handle whatever the wilderness threw at them. But the reality had been far more savage than they had anticipated. At the hospital, Jim was rushed into surgery. The medical team worked tirelessly to repair the damage, battling against the clock and the extent of the injuries. Mark sat in the waiting room, his hands still stained with Jim's blood, the events of the day replaying in his mind. He could hear the echoes of the bear's roar, the crack of gunfire, and the sound of his friend's pained breathing. The minutes stretched into hours as he waited for news, his thoughts consumed by the horror of what they had endured. Jim survived, but the road to recovery was long and fraught with challenges. The attack had left him with deep scars, both physical and emotional. Mark visited him often, and the weight of the experience was a shared burden between them. The encounter had changed them both, a stark reminder of the unpredictability of nature and the fine line between life and death in the wilderness. The hunters who once felt invincible now knew the true power of the wild, and the scars of that knowledge would stay with them forever. On August 12, 2024, Peter, a 55-year-old seasoned traveler with a deep love for wildlife, embarked on an Arctic cruise from Tromsø, Norway. The journey was a dream come true, a meticulously planned adventure into the remote icy waters of Svalbard. The cruise promised stunning landscapes and the opportunity to witness polar bears in their natural habitat. As the ship glided through the frigid Arctic waters, passengers were treated to breathtaking views of snow-capped mountains, vast glaciers, and endless ice expanses. Peter, camera in hand, was particularly eager to capture the majestic polar bears up close. The excitement aboard the ship peaked when the crew announced the sighting of polar bears on a distant ice floe. The ship anchored near the ice floe, allowing a small group, including Peter, to disembark and observe the bears more closely. The group, led by experienced guides armed with rifles, ventured cautiously onto the ice. They were well aware of the dangers posed by polar bears, especially as the animal's natural habitat continued to shrink due to climate change. The guides briefed the group on safety protocols, emphasizing the importance of staying together and following instructions. As the group carefully explored the ice, they marveled at the stark, frozen landscape. Suddenly, one of the guides spotted movement in the distance. A massive polar bear, larger than any they had seen, was emerging from the ice pack. The bear moved with deliberate grace, cutting through the terrain effortlessly. The group watched in awe, unaware of the imminent danger. Sensing the bear's intention, the guides urged the group to retreat toward the ship, but the bear had already closed much of the distance. In a split second, the bear charged, its massive paws propelling it forward with terrifying speed. The group scattered in panic, but Peter, caught off guard, was unable to move in time. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on his arm, dragging him across the ice as he screamed in pain. The guides acted quickly, firing warning shots to scare the bear away. The bear hesitated but did not retreat, its hunger and aggression overpowering the noise. Realizing that warning shots were ineffective, the lead guide made a difficult decision. He aimed directly at the bear and fired, striking it in the shoulder. The bear roared in pain but continued to drag Peter. A second shot hit the bear in the chest, causing it to release Peter and collapse onto the ice, finally subdued. The other passengers, who had been watching in horror, rushed to Peter's side. He lay on the ice, bloodied and barely conscious, his arm severely mangled. The guides administered first aid, stopping the bleeding and trying to keep Peter warm. They knew time was critical. Peter needed to be evacuated to a hospital immediately. Back on the ship, the crew prepared for an emergency evacuation. A distress signal was sent, and within minutes a rescue helicopter was on its way from Longyearbyen, the nearest settlement. Peter was carefully lifted onto the helicopter, accompanied by the ship's doctor, who worked to keep him stable during the flight. At the hospital in Longyearbyen, Peter was rushed into surgery. The doctors managed to save his arm, but the attack left him with deep wounds and a long road to recovery. The trauma of the experience would take time to heal, both physically and emotionally. Peter's survival was miraculous, but the attack sent shockwaves through the Arctic tourism industry. The incident raised serious questions about the safety of such expeditions and the growing frequency of polar bear encounters as their habitat continued to shrink. The debate over balancing tourism with wildlife conservation intensified as the world grappled with the consequences of human encroachment into once untouched wilderness. The scars on Peter's arm would forever remind him of the dangers that lurk in the Arctic's wild frontiers. February 15, 2024, dawned crisp and clear in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park. The forest was blanketed in a soft layer of snow, with the trees standing tall and bare against the winter sky. The park, a haven for nature enthusiasts, was known for its breathtaking trails and abundant wildlife, particularly the black bears that roamed the woods. On this chilly morning, 30-year-old Lisa Thompson was setting out on one of the park's more remote trails. An experienced hiker, Lisa had always been drawn to the solitude and beauty of the wilderness, finding peace in the quiet of the woods. Lisa, who had grown up hiking with her family, was no stranger to the risks that came with exploring nature. Over the years, she had developed a deep respect for the wildlife she encountered on her hikes. She had taken courses on wilderness survival and bear safety, ensuring she was well prepared for any situation. On this particular hike, Lisa had brought along her usual gear, including a bear bell to alert animals to her presence and bear spray as a precaution. Confident in her knowledge and experience, she was eager to spend the day immersed in the natural beauty of Shenandoah. As she hiked deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. The trail was covered in a thin layer of snow which crunched softly under her boots. Lisa took her time, pausing occasionally to take in the scenery and snap a few photos. She marveled at the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. It was a perfect day for a hike, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her as she continued along the path. However, the tranquility of the morning was suddenly shattered when Lisa unknowingly ventured too close to a black bear sow and her cubs. The mother bear, fiercely protective of her young, perceived Lisa as a threat. The bear, which had been hidden from view by the dense underbrush, let out a low, warning growl. Lisa froze, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to locate the source of the sound. Before she could react, the bear charged out of the undergrowth, its massive form barreling toward her with alarming speed. Lisa's instincts kicked in, and she began to back away slowly, trying to avoid making any sudden movements that might provoke the bear further. But the sow, driven by maternal instinct, closed the distance in a matter of seconds. The bear knocked Lisa to the ground with a powerful swipe of its paw, sending her sprawling into the snow. Pain shot through her body as the bear bit down on her arm, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. Lisa screamed, her voice echoing through the silent forest. but there was no one around to hear her cries for help. As the bear continued its relentless attack, Lisa's thoughts raced. She knew she needed to stay calm and try to protect herself, but the pain was overwhelming. She reached for her bear spray, her fingers fumbling as she struggled to pull it from her pack. The bear, sensing her movements, bit down harder, and Lisa felt the searing pain as its teeth tore into her skin. She was losing strength, and the situation was growing more desperate by the second. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow reached Lisa's ears. A group of hikers, drawn by the commotion, was rushing to her aid. The hikers, armed with bear spray and shouting loudly, managed to scare the bear off before it could inflict any further harm. The bear, realizing it was outnumbered, released Lisa and retreated into the woods, leaving her lying in the snow, bloodied and barely conscious. Lisa had survived the attack, but her injuries were severe. The hikers quickly assessed the situation, wrapping her wounds as best they could before calling for emergency assistance. The ordeal was far from over, but Lisa was alive, thanks to the timely intervention of those passing hikers. The hikers worked quickly to stabilize Lisa, wrapping her bleeding arm with whatever they had on hand. They knew that getting her to medical help was a race against time. One of them stayed by her side, talking calmly to keep her awake, while another set off down the trail to reach an area with cell service and call for emergency assistance. The forest, which had felt peaceful earlier, now seemed ominous and threatening, every sound a reminder of the danger they had just faced. As they waited for help, Lisa lay in the snow, her mind hazy from pain and shock. The bites on her arm were deep, and the wounds were still bleeding. Her entire body ached from the force of the bear's attack, and she felt a deep sense of fear that she had never experienced before. The adrenaline that had kept her going during the attack was fading, and she was beginning to feel the full impact of her injuries. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but eventually the hiker who had gone for help returned with the sound of sirens in the distance. A rescue team, alerted by the hiker's call, was making its way to their location. Relief washed over the group as they saw the paramedics arrive, ready to take over and provide Lisa with the care she so desperately needed. The team quickly assessed her condition, securing her on a stretcher and carefully moving her down the trail to a waiting ambulance. The ride to the nearest hospital in Luray, Virginia, was tense. Lisa drifted in and out of consciousness, her body weakened from blood loss and trauma. The paramedics worked to keep her stable, administering fluids and monitoring her vital signs. They knew the importance of getting her to the hospital as quickly as possible, where doctors could begin treating her injuries in a controlled environment. At the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses were waiting, prepared to handle the severity of Lisa's injuries. She was rushed into surgery, where the medical team worked to clean and close the deep gashes left by the bear's teeth and claws. The surgery was long and complicated, but the doctors were determined to save her arm and prevent any infection from setting in. After hours in the operating room, Lisa was moved to the intensive care unit. She was still in critical condition, but the immediate danger had passed. The medical team remained vigilant, closely monitoring her for any signs of complications. The attack had left her body battered and bruised, but she had survived thanks to the quick actions of the hikers and the medical team. The aftermath of the attack was felt deeply by Lisa and her family. The peaceful trails of Shenandoah, once a source of joy, now carried the memory of a terrifying encounter. Lisa would need months of rehabilitation to regain full use of her arm, and the psychological scars would take even longer to heal. The attack served as a sobering reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters, even in places that felt familiar and safe. As Lisa began her long recovery, the incident also prompted park officials to review their safety protocols, ensuring that hikers were better informed and prepared for the risks that came with exploring the wilderness. The community rallied around Lisa, offering support and encouragement as she faced the challenges ahead. She was determined to overcome the trauma of that February morning in the heart of Shenandoah National Park. February 18, 2024 marked the beginning of what seemed to be a perfect day for Steve, a seasoned fisherman in the remote wilderness of Alaska's Katmai National Park. Steve, a 42-year-old outdoor enthusiast, had been coming to this park for years. His love for fishing and the serenity of nature drew him to the park's rivers, where the salmon were plentiful and the landscape breathtaking. The park, known for its grizzly bear population, was a place where Steve had always exercised caution, fully aware of the potential dangers that came with fishing in bear country. Despite the risks, the thrill of the catch and the beauty of the surroundings kept him coming back year after year. Steve had spent countless hours honing his fishing skills, and he took pride in his ability to navigate the wilds of Alaska. He enjoyed the solitude of fishing alone, finding peace in the quiet of the wilderness. The river, alive with the movement of salmon, was a familiar friend to Steve. He knew the best spots to cast his line and had a deep respect for the natural world that surrounded him. The morning was calm, the air crisp and cold, as Steve made his way to the riverbank. The snow-covered landscape added to the sense of isolation, with only the sound of the rushing water breaking the silence. Steve set up his gear and began fishing, his focus entirely on the task at hand. The thought of grizzly bears was always at the back of his mind, but he felt confident in his knowledge of the area and his ability to keep a safe distance. As he cast his line into the river, Steve marveled at the beauty of the place. The mountains in the distance were capped with snow, and the water glistened in the pale winter sunlight. It was moments like these that made the challenges of fishing in such a remote area worthwhile. Steve was lost in the rhythm of fishing, patiently waiting for the telltale tug on his line that signaled a catch. Unbeknownst to Steve, a large grizzly bear had been drawn to the area by the scent of the fish. The bear, a massive male known to frequent the region, was hungry after a long winter. As Steve concentrated on his fishing, the bear silently approached its powerful form, blending into the background of the dense forest. The bear's acute sense of smell had led it to the river, and the presence of a human did little to deter its focus on finding food. Steve remained unaware of the impending danger, his back turned to the bear as he reeled in a large salmon. The thrill of the catch momentarily erased any thoughts of the potential risks that surrounded him. He was absorbed in the moment, oblivious to the fact that the bear was closing in, its instincts driving it toward the source of the scent that had drawn it from the woods. In an instant, the tranquility of the scene was shattered. The grizzly, now just a few feet away, charged at Steve with a speed and force that left him no time to react. The bear knocked him into the icy water, its massive paws and powerful jaws making quick work of him. Steve's fishing gear was scattered as he fought to free himself from the bear's grip, but the animal's strength was overwhelming. The grizzly dragged Steve's body from the riverbank into the forest, where it began to feed. The wilderness that Steve had loved so much had turned deadly in an instant, and his fight for survival was over as quickly as it had begun. As the day wore on, Steve's absence became noticeable when he failed to return to his campsite. His friends, who were used to his punctuality, grew concerned. They knew the risks of the area and understood that any delay could signal trouble. When Steve didn't show up by dusk, a search party was quickly organized. The search party, consisting of Steve's friends and local park rangers, began scouring the area as the sun started to set, casting long shadows over the snowy landscape. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the urgency to find Steve grew with each passing minute. They knew the dangers that nightfall in the Alaskan wilderness could bring, especially with a grizzly bear likely still in the area. The searchers moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the gathering darkness as they called out for Steve, hoping for a response. After several tense hours of searching, one of the rangers noticed signs of a struggle near the riverbank. The snow was disturbed, and there were deep claw marks in the frozen ground. They followed a trail of blood leading away from the water and into the dense forest. The grim realization began to set in as the searchers continued to follow the trail, their hearts heavy with the fear of what they might find. A short distance into the woods, they found what they had been dreading. Steve's body lay partially covered by snow, the grizzly bear having left its mark. His clothing was torn and his skin bore the unmistakable signs of a brutal attack. The rangers quickly assessed the situation and confirmed that Steve had succumbed to his injuries. The scene was harrowing, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of the wilderness and the power of the predators that inhabit it. The aftermath of the attack was a somber one. The searchers, deeply shaken by the discovery, carefully gathered Steve's remains and carried them back to the campsite. The group moved in silence, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavily over them. Back at the campsite, they contacted the authorities to arrange for Steve's body to be airlifted out of the park. The news of Steve's death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the small community that frequented Katmai National Park. Steve had been well known and respected among fellow outdoor enthusiasts, and his death was a devastating loss. The incident prompted discussions about the dangers of solo activities in bear country, even for those who were experienced and knowledgeable. Steve's body was transported to the nearest hospital in Anchorage, where an autopsy was performed. The medical team, though accustomed to the dangers of Alaskan wildlife, was still struck by the severity of the injuries. The deep gashes from the bear's claws and the crushing wounds from its jaws were a grim testament to the power of the animal. The hospital staff worked to prepare Steve's body for his family, who were left to grapple with the sudden and violent nature of his death. The community came together to support Steve's family during this difficult time. A memorial service was held in his honor, where friends and loved ones shared stories of his passion for the outdoors and his deep respect for nature. The service was a bittersweet reminder of the beauty and danger that coexist in the wilderness. In the weeks following the attack, discussions about bear safety intensified. The park authorities reviewed their protocols and increased warnings to visitors about the risks of solo activities, particularly during the salmon season when bear activity is heightened. Steve's death served as a tragic reminder that even the most seasoned outdoorsmen are vulnerable in the wild, and that the unpredictable nature of grizzly bears requires constant vigilance and respect.